Masechet Baba Kama Daf Pe Aleph. We're on the theme of the mitzvah of settling the land of Israel, and now we're going to learn about 10 conditions that Yehoshua placed upon all the tribes when he divvied up the land of Israel into different sections. So even though everybody gets their own land, nevertheless they already agree on condition that they will allow other people to have certain rights over public areas. Tenor Rabbanan, Asara Tenaim Hitna Yehoshua. The following are 10 conditions that Yehoshua placed. Sheyehu Mar'in Behorashin. People will have the right to graze their animals in forests. Forests are an area. We already saw that. While you can't graze animals in settled areas, but in the forest, that's okay. Umelaketin asim bistotehen. And furthermore, one can go into someone else's field and gather wood, right? The wood is just there, and if assuming that the owner does not need the wood and someone else needs some firewood, they can go and collect some firewood from there. Umelaketim asabim bechol makom chutz mitiltan. And furthermore, you can go into someone else's field and take the weeds. You assume the person doesn't need the weeds, but you can use them to burn or whatever, or for animal fodder, and so you can take them, except for weeds that grow in fenugreek, because apparently the weeds are good to be with the fenugreek, as the Gemara will discuss each of these in more detail. And one can pluck shoots anywhere, except for olive shoots, because those you have to leave a lot of it because you want it to be able to grow back well. If you have a spring that emerges on someone's land for the first time, everybody can share the water that comes from that spring, all the people in the city. People have a right to fish in the Sea of Galilee, next to Tiberias, as long as they don't put an underwater big fence to catch all the fish, and then because that will be an impediment to boats that want to go by. So yes, everyone can fish a little, but can't put a big fence. If someone needs to relieve themselves, they can go onto someone's property and relieve themselves behind the fence and get some privacy there, even if it's a field full of saffron, where the Gemara is going to talk about that it's the issue is using stones that are part of a person's wall to clean oneself after relieving, and so the stones, and he may ruin the wall of the stones that he is using. Nevertheless, is permitted, and even saffron, which is particularly sensitive, one is permitted to do so. One can walk through private land. Even on private land, there were paths that the public would walk through to get more quickly from one place to the other. And so one's permitted to do that during the summer when the land is hard, and walking on someone's land will not cause any damage. That's until the second rainfall. But once the second rainfall is there, then the ground is moist and the crops begin to sprout, and then stepping on the land will ruin it. So from at that point, then people cannot walk through someone's private field. They have to go all the way around. There were hard protrusions in the roads, like potholes and things sticking up, and so one is permitted when walking on the road to walk on the sides, even though that's actually on private property. So you're walking on people's lawns, or the edges of their fields, and not on the main thoroughfare, because the main thoroughfare would be have all these bumps. It would be difficult to walk on. And if someone wants to go in, is lost in someone else's vineyard, so they need to get out and find the nearest road or the nearest city, they have a right to cut down branches and enter, or cut down branches and exit. They don't have to simply walk all the way to the edge of the vineyard that might be very far away. If they need to find a way that's close to the nearest road or city, they can help themselves find their way, even by cutting down some of the private owners' vineyards. And someone who dies in some place with there's no family to bury the person, and so you come upon a corpse, so that's a big mitzvah to bury that corpse when there's no one else to do so. And the law is that wherever that person is lying, the dead person is lying, he acquires that place. So even if someone dies in the middle of a field and he has no one to take him to a proper burial place and a proper cemetery, so the passerby can simply bury that person wherever he is, even if it's in private property on someone else's field. So all these are incursions into someone's private property, but these are permitted. It's good for the welfare of the public, and therefore everybody has already agreed when they entered the land of Israel, when Yoshua gave them the land of Israel, it was on condition that yes, it's your private property for most things, but you have to allow others all these different variances. Okay, if you count the number of things here, it's actually 11, not 10, but we'll get to that. First, let's analyze each one. Shehu mar'in behorashin, that people are allowed to graze in forests, even if the forest is next to your private property or is your private property. Nevertheless, the forests are there. That's what they're for, so your animals can graze. Amar papa, lo maran ela daka begasa, aval daka bedaka, vegasa begasa lo, vechol sheken gasa bedaka lo. Says this is only true if we're talking about small cattle grazing in a field that has big trees, because then they won't destroy the trees, they won't do a lot of harm, so that's permitted. But any other combination, if it's small animals among small bushes, or big animals even among big trees, and all the more so if it's big animals among small bushes, that would not be allowed, because by grazing there, they will ruin the area. You're allowed to go into someone else's area and gather wood from their fields to use as animal fodder, or maybe to burn a fire. Lo maran ela bihizme vehige. This is only true for thorns and shrubs. Aval b'shadasim lo, but not other trees. You can't go take someone's orange trees and start plucking parts off. Only thorns, weeds, shrubs that they don't really need. And even these thorns and shrubs only if they're attached, so that you can go in and detach some branches, that's permitted. But if they're already detached by the owner, that means the owner already went in, detached them, and has some piles that he's going to use for himself. So those are already his, you can't take those. And even if they're attached, that's only, you're only allowed to take them if they're moist. You could take them for yourself. But if they're dried out, which is good, because they're good for firewood, so the owner would want to keep those for himself. So you can't take the best things, the things that you know the owner will want. But if it fulfills all the other conditions, then we can assume the owner is fine, he doesn't need them, and he's okay with other people coming in and taking them. And all this is provided you don't uproot the whole bush. You can just take a few branches. You don't want to uproot it, and then it can't grow anymore at all. You can go in to someone else's field and take the weeds, except if it's weeds among fenugreek. Now, why? Are you telling me that weeds are good for fenugreek? Having the weeds in there helps the fenugreek grow better, and that's why the owner wouldn't want you to take them? That's what it would seem from here, that it's good. We have a contradiction from Mishnah in Masechet Kilayim, that if you have weeds and fenugreek and weeds among them, or grasses, vegetation among them, you don't have to separate them. Now, kilayim, you're not allowed to plant different diverse species together, and these are diverse species. So how come you don't have to take it out? Because you only have to take it out if it's good for it. If they're beneficial for each other. But if the weeds are bad for the whatever else is growing, and in this case fenugreek, then you don't have to. So we prove from this Mishnah that weeds are actually bad for the fenugreek, and that's why you don't have to uproot them. So now we have a problem, because in the Baraita of the list of Yehoshua, it sounds like weeds are good for fenugreek, and the Mishnah says weeds are bad for fenugreek. How can we resolve this contradiction? We'll do so in a few ways. Amar Rav Yirmiyah la kashya, kan lezera, kan lezirin. Lezera kashu la'asabim, demachshi laha. Lezirin ma'ali laha, dechi kaime bene asabim mirakebat. It depends if the owner is growing the fenugreek for its seeds or for its stalks. You see, here's the seeds that are useful in themselves, and the stalks are also useful for other things. So the Mishnah is assuming that it's growing for its seeds, and the Baraita is that where it's growing, he's growing it for its stalks. If the owner is growing it for its seeds, so then you want as many seeds as possible, and the other weeds are going to diminish the growth of the seeds, and so that's where the Mishnah is talking about, that says that the weeds are bad for it. But in the Baraita that says that the weeds are good for the fenugreek, and therefore other people cannot take it, that's talking about where you want the fenugreek for its stalks. Now, if you have vegetation alongside, then the stalks can grow on top of those other vegetation, and so the stalks of fenugreek can actually grow higher by climbing on top of those weeds, and therefore it's actually good for it, makes it grow more, and that explains why other people cannot take it in the Baraita. Ibait ema, or another way to resolve the contradiction, kan le'adam, kan le'behema, techvan de lebehema hu de zar'a, asabim nami mi ba'ele. Another answer is that the Mishnah is talking about where it's planted for human consumption, and the Baraita is talking about where it's planted for animal consumption. So the Baraita that says the weeds are good for it, well, since it's meant for animals, so the other weeds are also good. The animals will eat that also as part of the animal fodder, and so the owner would want the weeds to remain there, and that's what the Baraita is talking about. If it's for human consumption, the human only wants the fenugreek and does not want the weeds there. Having the weeds there diminishes from the growth of the fenugreek, and therefore is actually bad for it, and that's the Mishnah. Umenayad inan amar papa share meshare le'adam la share meshare libhema. How can a passerby know if the owner meant for the fenugreek to be for an animal or for a person? Well, it depends. You can just look at it. If it's planted nicely in rows, then you know it's for human consumption, as someone deliberately planted it nicely to grow really good for human consumption. But if it's all haphazard, not in rows, then that's for animal consumption, because people put less care into growing animal fodder. You can pluck off shoots anywhere except olive shoots, because that will damage the olive trees. Peshu Rabbi Tanchum Rabbi Bar Yas Mushum Zaken Echad Bezayit Kabesa Bekanim Bagefanim Min Apekak Ulamala Ushar Kol Ilanot Min Ubo Shel Ilan Velo Min Hudo Shel Ilan. So Rabbi Tanchum and Bar Yas explained in the name of an elder that if you're taking some parts of an olive tree, you have to leave the trunk, and higher than the trunk, the size of an egg. Above that, you can take some, because you need that trunk and that root there in order for it to regrow. In case of reeds and grapevines, you have to find the first knot of the root, of the base, and from there up you can take, but not above that. And other trees you can take only from the thick part of the tree, but not from the thin parts of the tree that grow at the edges, because then those parts won't grow back. So that's how much. You want to make sure that if you're taking from a tree, it's okay. You're pruning it, as actually pruning it will make the rest of it grow better, in fact. But you don't want to take from something that will really damage the tree or the vine from growing again. Min hadash she'eno oseh perot velo min yashan shehu oseh perot mimakom she'eno ro'eh et hachama velo makom shehu ro'eh et hachama she'nemar meged tebuot shamesh. And furthermore, when you're taking from trees and vines, you can take from a new branch which did not yet produce fruit, because those are not so important. So you prune that off, and that's actually good and will help the other branches that are growing fruit, but don't take an old branch that is producing fruit, because then you're destroying the productive part of the tree. You can take from a part of the tree that's in the shade that doesn't produce very much, and but you're not allowed to take from a part that's facing the sun, because that's where, on the side where it's facing the sun, that's where it grows the best and creates the best fruit that ripens nicely. As the pasuk says in Zot HaBeracha, for the precious things, the fat of the land, that are the fruits of the sun. So you see that those that are facing the sun are the best fruits. If there is a spring that comes up in the city, all the people, comes up on someone's private property, all the people in the city can benefit from it. So the Baba Huna says, yeah, but the other residents have to pay him for the water that comes up. Yeah, they're allowed to take it, but they have to pay him. It's on his property. But halacha is not so. They can take it even without payment, right? He is very, very lucky that he got this spring on his land. It'd be very convenient for him to get water all the time. But we agreed from before that anyone who has a spring on his land, everybody in the city will be able to share of it. So one is permitted to fish in the Sea of Tiberia, but you can't put an underwater big fence to block off the whole thing and prevent boats from being able to pass through. So you can't use a big fence, but you can fish with nets and traps. You're not only with a fishing line, you definitely can use nets. Another braita that says what we just said, that the tribes stipulated that with each other, right? That anyone can come to the Sea of Galilee but not put an underwater fence, but they can bring boats and fish with nets and traps. Another braita teaches that the Sea of Tiberias is part of the tribe of Naphtali. In the Zot HaBeracha, again, there's a blessing to Naphtali that says he possesses the sea and the south. So what is south referring to? This is a stretch of land on the south part of the sea that also they get, because that's a good place that they can spread out their fishing nets and catch fish, so they get that extra piece as well. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Tilushin shebeharim b'chezkat kol hashebatim hem omdim umechubarim b'chezkat oto hashebet. Another braita that detached vegetation found in the mountains, that at the time of conquest, so at the time of they went into the land, anything that's detached, anyone can come and take it. But that's what anything that's still attached to the trees, attached to the ground, belongs only to the shevet that owns that area. A beautiful baraita that every single tribe, although they divided the land of Israel into many parts, every single shevet has a portion in the different topography, the mountains, lowland, and countryside. How do you know that? Shene'emar, Pinus ulachem ubo har emori ve'el kol shechana ba'arava, bahar u'bashefela, u'banegev u'b'chof hayam ve'gomer. Kenatam oseh ba'kena'anim va'perizim ba'memorim, shelifnehem shene'emar ve'el kol shechenav, al ma shechenav hachi havu. When Hashem tells Moshe, go and journey to the hill country of the Emori, and also the lowland, and the countryside, and the seashore. So first of all, you see that the Emori themselves had all the different topographies, and that's true not only for the Emori, but for the other peoples that had different city-states, and control different parts of the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, like the Canaanim Perizim. And how do you know? Because it says, and to its neighbors. So that means not only that the Amori have all the topographies, but also the neighbors had all the topographies. The Shevatim came in and they took over each of those different areas, and so each of the Shevatim also can benefit and have mountains and have lowlands And each of those different types of lands are good for different things. Someone's going, is walking on the path, and they need to relieve themselves. You're allowed to go into someone's field and relieve himself behind a fence, even if it's in a field of saffron flowers. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. So Rabbi Yaakov explains that the issue is that one is permitted not only to go onto the land, but also to take a stone out of the wall to clean themselves. They didn't have toilet paper. They used smooth stones, and so he might take one out of the wall to use it, and even though that may weaken the wall a little bit, all this is permitted. Amar Rav Chisda afilu b'Shabbat mosutra chasida shakelu mihadar amale lishma'eh lemachar zil shir kehe. And one can do so even on Shabbat. The issue on Shabbat is mukseh. Generally, just like today, people will rip toilet paper before Shabbat and set it aside, that this is what they're going to use on Shabbat. So in those days, they didn't have toilet paper, but they would take some pebbles and rocks and stuff and set it aside. It says, I'm going to use these in case I need to relieve myself, to clean myself. But what if someone's in a place where he didn't prepare rocks? There's not enough rocks, or he's traveling on the way and he needs to go. So what is he going to do? Will he not clean himself and be dirty? No, the rabbis are careful. They care about human dignity, and this is very undignified for a person not to be able to be clean. So therefore, the rabbi said we're not going to prohibit mukseh when it comes to issues of human dignity like this, and therefore one is permitted even to use mukseh rocks if there are no prepared rocks. That has a direct, seems like it wouldn't be relevant today, but it has a direct relevance if today you're somewhere that there's no ripped toilet paper or tissues. So same thing, the rabbis say you can't do a deoraita, but you can override a derabanan and rip toilet paper in a haphazard way. But those are interesting halachot, that for a separate time. Okay, anyway, so one is allowed to go and take these rocks and use them even on Shabbat. And Mozutra, who was a big chassid, he would, if he was near someone's fence, and he would permit himself to use it and put it back in the wall. And then after Shabbat, he would tell his attendant, go put plaster over it so it will be fit nice and securely back in the wall. I don't want to be responsible for weakening someone else's wall. So that's why he's a chassid, because technically you don't have to do all that, since everybody it gives permission to each other. That's part of the condition of the land, that people can use rocks in your wall for this purpose. One is permitted to walk on the set paths that go through people's private land. That's during the summer and when the land is hard, and walking through on these paths will not harm the land. And that means until the second rainfall, but once the second rainfall starts, then the land is moist and is starting to grow, and therefore stepping on the land will ruin it and is no longer allowed. That's true in the land of Israel. The Papa says, and here in Bavel, the land is always moist, and even a little bit of dew from the previous night will make stepping on it bad for the land, and therefore this is not true. In Bavel, you can't go and trample on people's land, even if it's just some dew from the previous night that makes it moist, and stepping on it will be bad. And one is allowed to walk on the sides, off the sides of the road, even though that's on the edge of people's land, because there are bumps in the road. Shemuel v'Rabbi Yehuda havu shakle v'azle be'orha hava mistalek Shemuel l'sidei derachim. So one time Shemuel and Rabbi Yehuda, his student, were walking along the road, and Shemuel was walking on the side of the road, even and walking on public property, private property. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda tena'in sheitna Yoshua afil beBavel. So Rabbi Yehuda asked his teacher Shemuel, It says these conditions that Yoshua made, that you're allowed to walk on the sides of the road on private property. I know that's true in Eretz Yisrael because that was part of the condition of giving the land. But is that true in Bavel? Why are you allowing yourself to go and trample on people's private property? And Shmuel answered, yes, indeed, I believe that this applies also outside the land of Israel, and that's why I permit it. The following story is now in Eretz Yisrael, and similarly, these two great rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Chiya, were walking on the side of the road on private property. Hava kamafsiya ve'azel Rabbi Yehuda ben Kanosa kamayhu. Amar le Rabbi Chiya, mi uzeh shemareh gedula befanenu. So while they're walking on the side of the road, taking advantage of this permission, there was a Rabbi Yehuda ben Kanosa who was walking in front of them, taking big steps so that he could walk over those protrusions in the middle of the road. So he's going in the middle of the road. He wants to be mahmir and not go on people's private property. Now it's very uncomfortable to walk that way. You got to watch where you're going and take funny steps. But he's doing it to be extra mahmir. Amar le Rabbi Chiya shema Rabbi Yehuda ben Kanosa. So they're looking at him funny, like, "Whoa, who does he think he is? He's more pious than the great sages of the time." So Rabbi Chiya told Rabbi, so that's what Rabbi's asking. Who is he? Who is this? Who does this person think he is? That he's going in the middle of the road. So Rabbi Chiya says it might be my student Rabbi Yehuda ben Kanosa, and everything does is l'shem shamayim. If he's doing it, he's not doing it out of haughtiness to show, "Oh, look how pious I am. See, I go in the middle of the road, and I don't want." I would not go on private property just to make himself look better, which would not be a good reason. One should not take upon himself a stringency just to show off. That misses the whole point. But if you do it l'shem shamayim, that's okay. So Rabbi Chiya says, I know if that's him, I know he's doing it l'shem shamayim. Ki matu legabe hazyeh amar le'elav Yehuda ben Kanosat gezartinu l'shakach begizra defar zela. So eventually they caught up to him, and they saw that indeed it was him, and they told him, or Rabbi Yehuda Nasi told him, if not that you were Yehuda ben Kanosa, that your teacher Rabbi Chiya testified that you do everything for the sake of heaven. Otherwise, if you were someone else, I would have said, you're trying to be haughty, and I would have cut your legs off with iron shears. Not literally. It means it would have excommunicated you for doing this. That's how bad it is to be haughty, especially to use a chumrah to be haughty. But I see now, but I know you're at l'shem shamayim, but therefore it's okay. Hato'eh ben akeramim mefaseg v'yored mefaseg v'oleh. Someone gets lost, like you get lost in a cornfield, right? So in Israel, you get lost in a vineyard. But the person is permitted to get himself out of there, from being lost, and he can cut down branches and come in, cut down branches and go out. Meaning any which way he needs to, he can cut down branches so we can get to the safety of the road or the city in the soonest way possible. We have a baraita that's talking about someone else who's outside the vineyard. He sees his friend in the middle of the vineyard lost. Now, he's outside the vineyard, so he knows exactly the right way to go. So the person outside the vineyard can save the lost guy by entering into the vineyard, cut down and make a short path and find his friend and cut down whatever he needs to get out in a short path that's permitted. You're helping your friend get out. Yes, there'll be some damage to the branches. That's too bad for the owner of the vineyard, but that's on condition. You have a vineyard. Listen, people may get lost, and you have to give them the right to cut down branches to get out. And if the lost person himself, there's no one else to save him around, he can himself cut down branches to get out and into a place where he knows where he is. Now, why does it say v'chen? That someone else can save him, and he himself can cut down branches to save himself. Like, wasn't that obvious? Lo nifsog nihadere nihadar bemisre kamashmatlan. If I only had the first half, I might have thought that only your friend who's outside the vineyard and knows exactly his way, that person is permitted because he's going to make a beeline and destroy as little as possible to go right to the guy who's lost, get him right out. That's okay because he knows exactly where he's going. But the lost guy himself, he's in the middle. He doesn't know where he's going. He's going to start cutting this way and turning this way and that way, and he's going to cut down half the vineyard by the time he figures out which way he's going and where he is. So you might have thought that that's not permitted, and therefore he has to say v'chen, to say even the lost person himself, even though he's not going to have the most direct path to the street or to the city, nevertheless he's allowed to extricate himself by cutting things down. You might have thought, right? Maybe you thought that he can't cut anything down. Maybe if you're lost in there, then you have to go to the edge and just walk along the boundary of the vineyard until you get all the way to the other side, to the beginning or the end of the vineyard, which will be a very long way out, and that might take a very long time. So you don't have to do that. Rather, he can cut so that he can find a shortest route, even though it won't necessarily be as short as the person outside. And now we ask, wait a second, why do you have to tell me that, Yehoshua made a special dispensation that people are allowed to cut down parts of a vineyard so that they can find themselves? This is a deoraita law. Anyone is allowed to do that, as the Torah says regarding that you have to return a lost object. Now, this doesn't only apply to returning a lost wallet, a lost phone, lost jewelry. How about does it apply, the Braita asks, to his own body? If you lose your body, right? You lose your head, you lose your body, you don't know where you are. Are you allowed to find yourself even at the expense of someone else? And the answer is yes. So a person, just like a person would, if I find your animal, I have to take expense upon myself and feed your animal and take care of it until I'm able to find the owner. So too, if a person if I find a lost person, or a lost person needs to find himself because he's in the middle of your vineyard, then they are permitted to cut down vines in order to be able to find where they are. Now, so since this is deoraita, I don't need to tell me that Yehoshua made a special condition about this. And the answer is deoraita hu teka b'misreh. Atahu taken b'mafsig ve'oleh, mafsig ve'yored. No, if it was only for the deoraita, I would say, okay, yes, you're allowed to find yourself by going along the boundary without damaging more vines. Just walk along the boundary of the vineyard, even though that may be a very long time till you get to the end of it. But that's sufficient for you to find yourself, I might have thought, and therefore the takana of Yehoshua is that not only are you allowed to walk all along the boundary, you can even cut through to get the most direct route to the nearest city or the nearest street. Umet misva kana mekomo. The last thing on the list is that when someone dies in the middle of someone's field, then he acquires that place and he has a right to be buried there and gets that place. That's his cemetery plot forever, even if it's on someone else's private property. We have a challenge. Minhu. המוסה מת מותר באיסרתיה, מפנהו למין איסרתיה או לשמאל איסרתיה, שדה בור ושדה ניר, מפנהו לשדה בור. This B'raitas teaches that if someone finds a dead body in the middle of the street, this word isratya is from Greek, strata. It's the root of our English word street, which is cool. Okay, so you find the dead body in the street. You don't leave it in the middle of the street and bury it right there, because then Kohanim won't be able to walk by. Anyone who wants to be tahor will become tameh by walking on the street. So that's very inconvenient. Rather, you can move it to the right of the street or to the left side of the street. Now, if it's found somewhere in between different types of fields, and you can move it to one or another type of field, you should pick the field that will have the least damage. So if you have it between a fallow field and a plowed field, so you should move it to the fallow field because nothing's growing there anyway. The plowed field, well, it's not seeded yet, but it will eventually. So move it to the fallow one. If the choice is between sedeh nir usteh zera, mefaneo sedeh nir, between a plowed field and a sown field, then move it to the plowed field. It's not yet sown, so don't ruin the guy's sown field. Hayu shetehen burot, shetehen nirot, shetehen zeruot, mefaneu l'makom she'yiseh. But if both of them are the same quality, both are empty, or both have are plowed, or both are sown, then you can put the body anywhere you want. You see from this long baraita that you can move a body from one place, that's from one place to another, where it will cause less damage and be more convenient. So how come this seems to contradict the baraita that says that a corpse acquires its place no matter where it is? Amar Bevai b'mutal ala mesar mitoch shenitan lefanoto mefane l'chol makom sheyirseh. Bevai explains that when can you move it? Only if it's on the pathway. Now, once you're allowed to move it off the pathway, then you can decide, should I go to the right? Should I go to the left? Should I put it in this field that's about to grow things, or that other field that wasn't growing things anyway? So then you can decide where it's best to put it. But if it dies in the middle of a particular field, not on the road, then you have to put it in that field. Even if it's a sown field, then you have to leave it there. Amri asara hane chad sereh havyan. The beginning of the Braita says these are 10 conditions that Yoshua made, but then if we count them, we find that there are 11. Me'alechin b'shvel hareshut shelamo amara. And the answer is Yoshua instituted 10 of them, but there's one of them that was not by Yoshua, but rather by King Shlomo, and that's the fact that you can walk through paths that cut through private fields in the summer. That was not from Yoshua. That was added later by King Shlomo. Kedetanya, hare shekalu perotav min hasedeh ve'eno maniach bnei adam likanes betoch sadehu, ma ha'beriot omerot alav, ma hana'a yesh piloni liploni, u'ma ha'beriot mezikot lo. The Braita teaches if someone's produce was harvested from the field, that's it. There's nothing else in the field, right? This is in the springtime or early summertime, and now the field is empty, and so would be no harm for people to walk through the field. If the owner nevertheless is so stubborn and stingy that he doesn't let people enter into the field and walk through to get a shortcut, what do people say about the person? They say, what benefit does he have by stopping us from walking through? What are the people doing that would cause him damage? He's just being stingy and annoying, right? And he's not losing anything if he would allow us to go through. So people talk about him negatively. Alav HaKatuv Omer, Miyotov al tikre ra. About him, the pasuk says he prevents himself from doing good, and therefore people call him evil, right? So in other words, don't be called evil by refraining from doing good. Rather, if you can do good and it's no expense to yourself, try to be generous. This is quoted as a pasuk, but there is no such pasuk in Tanakh. So is this really a pasuk? Why are you saying so? Yes, there is indeed a pasuk like that. Those are not the exact words, just a paraphrase of the pasuk, but the actual pasuk is from Mishleh. Says, do not withhold good from someone to whom it's due when it's in the power of your hands to do something good for him. So you can do something good, do it. Don't stop yourself just because you want to be stingy. So this is from Mishleh, which is attributed to Shlomo HaMelech, and an application of this is allowing people to go through your field if it's no harm to you. And therefore, 10 of them are instituted by Yoshua, and this one by King Shlomo. Betu leka. Next, the Gemara asks, are those all of them? We have 11. You counted 11, but actually, there's a few more stipulations that Yoshua made at the time that he came and settled the land. V'ha'ika de Rabbi Yehuda. De Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'shatos at zebalim adam osi zeb lo l'rshut harabim v'sobro kol sheloshim. כדי שיהיה נשוף ברגלי אדם ברגלי בהמה, שעל מנת כן הנחיל יהושע לישראל את הארץ. Rabbi Yehuda taught, in a baraita that at the time that people take the manure out of their fields, they can put it in the middle of the street and pile it up for 30 days so that it should be trodden upon by the feet of people and feet of animals walking by. It makes the manure better to use as fertilizer when people step on it. Well, don't you wish you lived in ancient times? You can imagine just the smell and experience of walking through the street, because this is permitted, even though this is the public thoroughfare and people have a right to walk there. And when you're putting your private stuff on the public thoroughfare, that's part of the condition that people made. The only example I could think of like this is that when it snows a lot, people will shovel their snow into the middle of the street so that the cars will run over it and melt it. And so that's what the street is for. So here's another thing that is permitted. Then Yehoshua made a condition. How come this one is not in the list of the 10? V'ha'ikad Rabbi Yishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka detanya Rabbi Yishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka omer tenai betin hu shehezeh yored letoch sedeh chavero v'koseh socho shel chavero להסיל נחיל שלו ונותן לו דמי socho shel chavero. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Yochanan ben Beroka, taught that Bet Din made a condition that a person is permitted to go into his neighbor's field and cut a branch in order to save his bee colony. And then they'll pay for the branch after. In other words, I have a beehive and a bee colony on my land, and then the bees relocated and went on a branch in your property, but they're my bees. So I can go and cut off the branch where they set up a new colony and bring the whole branch back to my property and take back my bees, even though I'm taking a branch from you. So I'll pay the value of the branch and get the bees that are rightfully mine. So this is a condition that is set forth that everybody who lives in the land of Israel agrees to. And another condition that the land of Israel was given for is that, let's say someone has a barrel of honey, which is very, very expensive, and then all of a sudden it breaks while he's carrying it and the honey is pouring out, and someone else is nearby and he has a barrel of wine. Wine is expensive, but it's much cheaper than honey. So the one who has a barrel of wine should pour out his wine on the floor and use his barrel to save the honey because it's more expensive. And then the owner of the honey must repay the owner of the barrel of wine the amount of the wine, and that way it's a win-win, or less loss to everyone. The person that owns the wine, it comes out even, and the person that owns the honey will only lose the value of wine, but will save the value of the honey. So people should cooperate for the benefit of everyone. Utnai betin hu shehezeh mefarek et asav eton pishtano shel chabero ונוטל דמי עשיו מתוך פשתנו של חברו, ושעל מנת כן הנחיל יהושע לישראל את הארץ. And another condition is that if someone has some wood that his animal is carrying, and another person is carrying flax. Now the flax is worth much more. So let's say the person who's carrying the flax's donkey broke down, and now the flax is on the side of the road. It's going to get all ruined. So the person who has the wood should remove the wood, put it on the side of the road, and carry the flax on behalf of the flax owner, even though that means the wood will be lost. And then the owner of the wood gets paid back the value of the wood from the value of the flax. A similar case. And all these are conditions that when Yehoshua apportioned the land, he said you can have it on condition that you follow all these things. So now we have a whole list of additional items. It's not just 10. How come he said 10 if it should be like 14 of them already? And the answer is, we're not talking about minority opinions. All these are just minority opinions that says this is an additional thing to the list. The list of 10 is agreed upon by everyone. It follows majority. Okay, the previous lists and those Baraitot were all statements of Tanaim, and so these were all only individual Tanaim, minority opinions. But the following is said by Rabbi Yochanan Amorah, quoting an earlier opinion that seems to be agreed upon by everyone. Echad ilan hanoteh letoch sadeh chavero, v'echad ilan hasamuch lemesar mebi v'koresh. Al menat ken inchil Yoshua l'Yisrael et ha'aretz. If I own a tree and it makes the first fruit, I have to bring the Bikurim to Yerushalayim and recite the Mikra Bikurim Arami Oved Avi. Now, if I have a tree that is leaning and the top branches are over my neighbor's land, or if it's I plant it very close, you're not supposed to plant a tree very close to your neighbor's land because then the roots are going to go under that person's land and weaken their land. Nevertheless, if I have a tree like that is benefiting from someone else's land, still, when it grows fruits, I, as the owner of the tree, take the fruits to Yerushalayim and still say the whole Mikra Bikurim. Even though technically it's benefiting from someone else's land and you only bring Bikurim if it's a tree that grows on your own land, nevertheless, this is one of the takanot of Yehoshua that everybody should share. Okay, so this person benefited somewhat from your land, from overhanging fruit or from roots. Okay, so nevertheless, give it to them, let them have their fruit, and say the Mikra Bikurim. So this is an one that is agreed upon by everybody. So there's definitely more than 10. Elaman tena asara tena'in sheitna Yehoshua Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who rather the baraita that we started with today is that said 10. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and according to his count, there were 10. Rav Gevia mi bekatil matnila behedja Rabbi Tanchu Rabbi Barias mishum amri mishum zaken echad umano Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asara tenain hitna Yehoshua. And in fact, Rav Gevia from this place, Bekatil, actually has a version of the Braita that says explicitly that the original Braita we started with was the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, as it says, said the name of one elder, and who is that elder? Is in fact Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who said there are 10 conditions, but Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is an Amorah. Rabbi Yochanan is also an Amorah, so Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I think there are 11. So that's why there's a machloket amoraim about how many of these takanot there are. But in some, all these takanot are to improve the land of Israel and encourage cooperation and people sharing for the benefit of everyone. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.